The past 4 years have been a turbulent period for the United States. A global pandemic, economic uncertainty, and social unrest have tested the nation's resilience. At the helm of this tumultuous era has been the Biden administration, led by President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Their tenure has been marked by a series of crises, both domestic and international, leaving many Americans questioning the direction of the country. This essay delves into the policies and decisions of the Biden-Harris administration, examining the impact on the nation's well-being and global standing. From the outset, the Biden administration faced an unprecedented challenge navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. The virus had already claimed countless lives and crippled the economy. The new administration inherited a nation grappling with fear, uncertainty, and a deep sense of division. Since taking office, the Biden-Harris administration has faced a barrage of criticism from both sides of the political aisle. Some of this criticism stems from the unprecedented challenges of the time, while other critiques target specific policy decisions and their perceived failures. The handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the surge in inflation have all drawn intense scrutiny. One of the most contentious issues has been the administration's handling of the economy. Critics argue that the administration's policies, particularly massive spending bills, have fueled inflation and exacerbated economic inequality. Others point to the administration's focus on climate change and social justice initiatives as distractions from more pressing economic concerns. The debate over the economy is likely to remain a central point of contention throughout Biden's presidency. Beyond the economy, the Biden-Harris administration has faced criticism for its handling of foreign policy and immigration. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, which resulted in the deaths of American service members and Afghan civilians, drew widespread condemnation. Critics argue that the withdrawal damaged America's global standing and emboldened adversaries like China and Russia. Upon assuming office, President Biden and Vice President Harris outlined an ambitious agenda. They pledged to unite a divided nation, combat the COVID-19 pandemic, rebuild the economy, and restore America's standing in the world. Their campaign promises resonated with millions of Americans who were eager for a change after 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency. However, translating those promises into tangible results has proven to be a daunting task. The Biden-Harris administration has faced a number of unforeseen challenges, including the emergence of new COVID-19 variants, the war in Ukraine, and rising global inflation. These challenges have tested the administration's ability to govern effectively and have exposed the limitations of its power. The gap between the administration's rhetoric and the realities on the ground has fueled frustration and disillusionment among many Americans. The Biden-Harris administration has also been hampered by the deep political divisions that continue to plague the United States. The country remains sharply polarized along partisan lines, making it difficult to build consensus on even the most pressing issues. The administration's efforts to reach across the aisle have been met with resistance from Republicans, who view many of the administration's proposals as too radical. As the Biden-Harris administration enters its 4th year, it faces mounting pressure to deliver on its promises. The American people are looking for leadership, stability, and a clear vision for the future. The COVID-19 pandemic presented the Biden-Harris administration with an unprecedented challenge from the outset. Inheriting a nation grappling with a deadly virus and a crippled economy, the administration faced the daunting task of containing the spread. The early days were dominated by the pandemic, with every decision scrutinized. The initial response focused on expanding testing, securing PPE, and promoting mask wearing. A significant decision was continuing Operation Warp Speed to accelerate vaccine development. The administration faced the complex challenge of overseeing the vaccine rollout. The handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was a defining moment in its early days. Operation Warp Speed, a legacy inherited or squandered. The Biden-Harris administration inherited Operation Warp Speed, a program to accelerate COVID-19 vaccine development and distribution. The program was credited with rapid vaccine development, but faced criticism for its expedited timeline. The administration had to ensure a smooth transition and maintain momentum during a critical phase. They faced challenges like vaccine safety concerns and misinformation. Efforts were made to bolster public confidence and address hesitancy. Despite progress, the administration faced criticism for initial delays and supply shortages. They increased funding, streamlined logistics, and launched awareness campaigns. Ultimately, the program succeeded in making vaccines widely available. Lockdowns and mandates, a necessary evil or government overreach. The Biden-Harris administration faced the challenge of balancing public health with economic considerations and individual liberties. Their approach relied on lockdowns, mask mandates, and vaccine requirements. These measures sparked debates about government overreach and individual freedom. Proponents argued they were necessary to slow the virus and save lives. They pointed to scientific evidence showing effectiveness in reducing transmission rates. Opponents argued these measures infringed on liberties and caused economic damage. They feared these measures could justify future government overreach. The administration faced criticism from both sides, impacting public trust and the economy. The economic fallout, navigating the uncharted waters of a global crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered a global economic crisis, sending shockwaves through financial markets and disrupting supply chains. The administration's economic policies were linked to its pandemic response, providing relief and laying the groundwork for recovery. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 aimed at providing immediate relief to those impacted by the pandemic. Some argued the stimulus package contributed to rising inflation, reaching a 40-year high in 2022. The long-term economic impact of the pandemic and the administration's response remains to be seen. The United States has long grappled with the challenges of illegal immigration, particularly along its southern border with Mexico. The Biden-Harris administration inherited a border security apparatus that had been significantly bolstered by the previous administration, which made cracking down on illegal immigration a cornerstone of its policy agenda. However, the Biden-Harris administration took a markedly different approach, signaling a shift away from the enforcement-centric policies of its predecessor and towards a more humanitarian and compassionate stance on immigration. This shift in policy was immediately apparent in the administration's decision to halt construction of the border wall, a project championed by the previous administration as a symbol of its commitment to border security. The Biden-Harris administration argued that the wall was ineffective, wasteful, and environmentally damaging, and instead pledged to focus on more humane and effective border security measures. The administration also reversed a number of other Trump-era immigration policies, including the Remain in Mexico policy, which required asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their cases were processed in the United States. This policy, while credited with deterring some migrants from attempting to cross the border illegally, was widely criticized by human rights groups who argued that it exposed asylum seekers to dangerous conditions in Mexico. The Biden-Harris administration's decision to reverse these policies was met with praise from immigration advocates and human rights groups who argued that it represented a long overdue shift away from the harsh and inhumane policies of the previous administration. However, these policy changes also drew criticism from those who argued that they would lead to a surge in illegal immigration and weaken border security. The Biden-Harris administration's approach to immigration extended beyond simply reversing the policies of its predecessor. The administration articulated a broader vision for immigration policy that emphasized compassion, humanitarianism, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of migration. This approach, while lauded by some as a welcome departure from the enforcement-centric policies of the past, was viewed by others as naive, unrealistic, and potentially detrimental to the interests of American citizens. One of the key tenets of the administration's immigration policy was a focus on addressing the push factors driving migration from Central America, such as poverty, violence, and climate change. The administration argued that by improving living conditions in these countries, it could reduce the number of people seeking to migrate to the United States illegally. To this end, the administration pledged billions of dollars in aid to Central American countries and launched initiatives aimed at promoting economic development and combating corruption in the region. However, critics of this approach argued that it was misguided and unlikely to succeed. They pointed out that the root causes of migration are complex and deeply entrenched, and that simply throwing money at the problem would not address the underlying issues. They also argued that the administration's focus on addressing root causes diverted resources and attention away from more effective border security measures. The Biden-Harris administration's shift away from enforcement-centric immigration policies towards a more compassionate and humanitarian approach was a significant departure from the policies of the previous administration. While this approach resonated with many who believed that the United States had a moral obligation to help those fleeing violence and persecution, it also raised concerns about the potential consequences for border security and the rule of law. The Biden-Harris administration's emphasis on addressing the root causes of migration faced significant challenges. Efforts to tackle poverty, violence, corruption, and climate change proved daunting. The scale and complexity of these issues were immense. Decades of entrenched problems are not easily solved. External factors like climate change and crime exacerbate these issues. A long-term, multifaceted approach is required. Ensuring aid reaches those in need is challenging. Corruption and weak governance plague development efforts. Navigating these challenges is crucial to success. Critics argue the focus on root causes neglects pull factors like job opportunities. Policies reversing Trump-era measures may have exacerbated the border crisis. The Biden-Harris administration's shift in immigration policy coincided with a surge in the number of migrants attempting to cross the southern border. This surge, driven by a confluence of factors including the COVID-19 pandemic, economic hardship in Central America, and the perception that the Biden administration would be more lenient towards migrants, overwhelmed Border Patrol resources and created a humanitarian crisis at the border. As the number of migrants arriving at the border increased, so too did the challenges of processing and caring for them. Border Patrol facilities, already operating at or near capacity, were overwhelmed by the influx of migrants, leading to overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. Images of children sleeping on floors in overcrowded holding cells sparked outrage and accusations that the Biden administration was mishandling the situation. The surge in migrant arrivals also strained the resources of non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and local communities along the border. NGOs struggled to provide basic necessities such as food, water, and shelter to the growing number of migrants in need, while local communities grappled with the influx of migrants into their towns and cities. The Biden-Harris administration faced criticism from both sides of the political aisle for its handling of the humanitarian crisis at the border. Critics on the left argued that the administration was not doing enough to address the root causes of migration, and that its policies were too focused on deterrence and enforcement. Critics on the right argued that the administration's policies had encouraged more migrants to attempt to enter the United States illegally, thereby exacerbating the crisis. The economic impact of illegal immigration is a complex and contentious issue, with proponents and opponents of stricter immigration enforcement offering competing narratives about the costs and benefits of illegal immigration. The Biden-Harris administration's more lenient approach to immigration enforcement reignited this debate, with critics arguing that the administration's policies would lead to job losses, depressed wages, and increased strain on social services. Opponents of illegal immigration argue that undocumented workers compete with native-born Americans for jobs, driving down wages and displacing American workers, particularly in low-skill industries. They also point to the costs associated with providing social services to undocumented immigrants, such as education, healthcare, and law enforcement, arguing that these costs place a burden on taxpayers and strain government budgets. Proponents of illegal immigration counter that undocumented workers often fill jobs that Americans are unwilling to do, particularly in industries such as agriculture, construction, and hospitality. They argue that undocumented workers contribute to the economy by paying taxes, starting businesses, and boosting consumer demand. Moreover, they contend that deporting undocumented workers would have a devastating impact on certain industries and could lead to higher prices for consumers. The debate over the economic impact of illegal immigration is often framed in stark binary terms, with each side accusing the other of cherry-picking data and ignoring inconvenient truths. The reality is far more nuanced, with the economic impact of illegal immigration varying depending on a range of factors, including the skill level of the workers, the industries in which they are employed, and the specific economic conditions of the region in question. While the debate over illegal immigration often dominates headlines, the United States also faces significant challenges with its legal immigration system. The legal immigration system is plagued by backlogs, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and a complex web of laws and regulations that make it difficult for individuals and families to navigate the process of immigrating to the United States legally. The Biden-Harris administration, while focused on addressing the immediate crisis at the southern border, also pledged to reform the legal immigration system and make it more efficient, humane, and responsive to the needs of the 21st century. One of the most pressing challenges facing the legal immigration system is the massive backlog of applications for green cards, visas, and citizenship. This backlog, which has been building for years, leaves millions of individuals and families in limbo, uncertain of their future and unable to fully participate in American society. The Biden-Harris administration proposed increasing visa caps, streamlining the application process, and allocating additional resources to the agencies responsible for processing immigration applications in an effort to reduce this backlog. Another challenge facing the legal immigration system is the complex and often arbitrary nature of immigration laws and regulations. The current system is a patchwork of laws, regulations, and court decisions that can be difficult to understand and navigate, even for immigration lawyers and advocates. The Biden-Harris administration expressed support for comprehensive immigration reform that would simplify and modernize the legal immigration system, making it more fair, efficient, and accessible to those seeking to immigrate to the United States legally. Section 7, The Politics of Immigration, a wedge issue in a divided nation. Immigration has long been a divisive issue in American politics. The Biden-Harris administration's approach further inflamed this debate. Republicans advocate for stricter border security measures. This stance is popular with the Republican base. Democrats favor a more compassionate approach to immigration. This stance is popular with the Democratic base. The Biden-Harris administration's efforts to balance these views prove difficult. Section 8, The Path Forward, Balancing Security, Compassion, and the Rule of Law. The challenges facing the United States on immigration are complex and multifaceted, defying easy solutions or quick fixes. The Biden-Harris administration's efforts to address these challenges, while guided by good intentions and a commitment to humane and compassionate policies, have been met with mixed results. As the administration enters its fourth year, it faces the daunting task of balancing the need for border security with the desire to uphold the rule of law and provide refuge to those fleeing violence and persecution. Finding a path forward on immigration requires a commitment to pragmatism, compromise, and a recognition that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Addressing the root causes of migration, while essential, is a long-term endeavor that will require sustained investment and a willingness to address the underlying factors driving migration, such as poverty, violence, and climate change. At the same time, the United States must also address the immediate challenges at the southern border. This includes providing adequate resources to Border Patrol agents, improving conditions in detention facilities, and streamlining the asylum process to ensure that those with legitimate claims for asylum are treated fairly and humanely. Ultimately, finding a sustainable and humane approach to immigration requires a recognition that this is not just a border security issue, but a humanitarian, economic, and moral issue as well. It requires a commitment to upholding the rule of law while also recognizing the dignity and humanity of all people, regardless of their immigration status. Economic challenges under the Biden administration. The Biden-Harris administration promised to build back better after the COVID-19 pandemic. Their vision included massive spending, green energy, and interventionist economic policies. Critics argue these policies have fueled inflation and hampered job growth. The $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan provided relief, but also contributed to rising inflation. The administration's ambitious social spending programs have raised concerns about national debt. The impact of these policies on the American economy remains to be seen. Inflation has roared back with a vengeance under the Biden-Harris administration. The Consumer Price Index has risen at its fastest pace in decades, reaching a 40-year high in 2022. This surge in prices has been felt acutely by American families. The rising costs of groceries, gasoline, housing, and healthcare. Inflation has become a major source of economic anxiety. A confluence of factors, including supply chain disruptions, increased consumer demand, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have all contributed. Critics argue that the administration's policies have exacerbated inflationary pressures. The Federal Reserve has responded by raising interest rates, risking a recession. Few issues have been as politically charged as the Biden-Harris administration's approach to energy policy. The administration aims to transition the U.S. towards renewable energy sources. Critics argue these policies have led to higher energy prices and job losses. President Biden revoked the Keystone XL pipeline permit on his first day. A moratorium on new oil and gas leases aims to curb emissions but limits production. These actions have created uncertainty and contributed to higher energy prices. The administration defends its policies as necessary for addressing climate change. Efforts to increase renewable energy production and promote efficiency are ongoing. Critics say the focus on renewables compromises energy independence and affordability. While the Biden-Harris administration touts low unemployment rates, many Americans struggle as wages lag behind the rising cost of living. The pandemic worsened wage stagnation, especially for low-wage workers. Inflation has further eroded purchasing power. The administration supports a $15 minimum wage, but it has stalled in Congress. Some states have raised wages, but rising costs offset gains. Growing inequality is economically unsustainable. A world on edge, foreign policy challenges in a turbulent era. The Biden-Harris administration inherited a world in flux, grappling with complex challenges. From the rise of China and Russia to terrorism and climate change, the global landscape is daunting. The administration seeks to restore American leadership while adapting to geopolitical shifts. one pressing challenge is the rise of China as a formidable competitor. The administration counters China by strengthening Indo-Pacific alliances. It also calls out China's human rights abuses. Yet, cooperation with China on climate change and nuclear issues is acknowledged. The administration confronts a more assertive Russia, responding with sanctions and bolstering NATO's presence, engaging Russia on strategic stability issues like arms control. Beyond great power rivalries, other challenges include terrorism and climate change. The fall of Kabul, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Biden-Harris administration's handling of the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan in August 2021 was controversial. The withdrawal marked the end of America's longest war, but was marred by chaos and violence. Critics accused the administration of poor planning and execution. The images of desperate Afghans clinging to departing aircraft shocked the world. The chaotic withdrawal had far-reaching consequences, raising questions about America's commitment to its allies. The dragon in the room navigating a more assertive China. The rise of China poses the most significant geopolitical challenge to the United States in the 21st century. The Biden-Harris administration has recognized this challenge and has made competition with China a central focus. The administration has pursued a multi-pronged strategy aimed at countering China's growing influence. Strengthening alliances in the Indo-Pacific region is essential to countering China's military and economic might. The administration has deepened ties with Japan, South Korea, and Australia. It has also revitalized the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad. Addressing China's unfair trade practices remains a priority. The administration has called out China's human rights abuses, particularly in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. Despite a confrontational approach, cooperation on climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, and global health is necessary. Managing the US-China relationship is essential to global peace and prosperity. The Biden-Harris administration came into office seeking to stabilize relations with Russia, which had deteriorated significantly under the previous administration. However, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 shattered any hopes of a rapprochement and plunged US-Russia relations to their lowest point in decades. The administration has responded to Russia's aggression with a combination of diplomacy, economic sanctions, and military assistance to Ukraine, while also seeking to avoid a direct military confrontation with Russia. The Biden-Harris administration has condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a violation of international law and a threat to the international order. The administration has imposed unprecedented economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its financial institutions, energy sector, and oligarchs close to President Vladimir Putin. The administration has also provided billions of dollars in military assistance to Ukraine, including lethal weapon systems, intelligence sharing, and training for Ukrainian forces. The Biden-Harris administration has also sought to rally international condemnation of Russia's actions, working closely with NATO allies and other partners to impose a coordinated response. The administration has also sought to provide humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, which has suffered immense human and economic costs as a result of the war. The Biden-Harris administration has made clear that it views Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a defining moment in the post-Cold War era, and that it is committed to defending the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right of nations to choose their own destiny. The administration has also warned that Russia will face severe consequences for its actions, and that the United States will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. The Biden-Harris administration pledged to repair relations with America's European allies. Relations had been strained by the previous administration's America First policies. The administration has sought to reassure allies of America's commitment to NATO. However, challenges remain in coordinating a unified response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The administration has sought to revitalize NATO, which it views as the cornerstone of transatlantic security, and reaffirmed America's commitment to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. The administration has also sought to strengthen cooperation on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and climate change. The Middle East has long been a region of instability and conflict. The Biden-Harris administration faces complex challenges navigating the region's geopolitical fault lines, balancing commitments to allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia with promoting human rights and democracy. Building on the Abraham Accords for regional peace while addressing the Palestinian issue remains critical. Reviving the Iran nuclear deal is a priority, but talks have stalled. Relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE are also under scrutiny. Balancing strategic interests with values in this volatile region is challenging. Section 7. Global leadership tested America's standing on the world stage. The Biden-Harris administration came into office pledging to restore America's global leadership after 4 years of America First policies that had alienated allies and emboldened adversaries. The administration has sought to reassert American leadership on issues such as climate change, global health security, and democracy promotion, and has sought to rebuild trust with allies who had felt abandoned by the previous administration. The Biden-Harris administration has rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, which the previous administration had withdrawn from, and has pledged to make the United States a leader in the fight against climate change. The administration has also sought to strengthen global health security by rejoining the World Health Organization and by pledging to donate billions of doses of COVID-19 vaccines to developing countries. The Biden-Harris administration has also sought to promote democracy and human rights around the world, reversing the previous administration's embrace of authoritarian leaders. The administration has imposed sanctions on countries with poor human rights records and has sought to support pro-democracy movements and activists. However, the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to restore America's global leadership have been hampered by a number of factors, including the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the perception that the United States is in decline, and the rise of China as a global power. The administration has also faced criticism from both domestic and international audiences for its handling of various foreign policy challenges, such as the war in Ukraine and the Iran nuclear deal. Section 8. The Path Forward. Recalibrating American foreign policy in an age of uncertainty. The Biden-Harris administration's foreign policy has been shaped by a rapidly evolving global landscape characterized by great power competition, technological disruption, climate change, and a resurgence of authoritarianism. The administration has sought to adapt to this new reality by recalibrating America's role in the world, emphasizing diplomacy and multilateralism, and focusing on strengthening alliances and partnerships. The administration has recognized that the United States cannot solve the world's problems alone, and that it must work with others to address shared challenges. The administration has sought to rebuild trust with allies and partners, and has emphasized the importance of diplomacy and multilateralism in addressing global issues. The administration has also recognized the need to adapt America's military and economic might to the challenges of the 21st century. The administration has sought to modernize the U.S. military, focusing on emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and cyber warfare. The administration has also sought to strengthen the U.S. economy by investing in infrastructure, education, and research and development, recognizing that economic strength is essential to national security. The Biden-Harris administration's foreign policy has been a work in progress, marked by both successes and setbacks. The administration has faced a daunting array of challenges, and its record so far is a mixed bag. However, the administration has articulated a clear vision for America's role in the world, and its emphasis on diplomacy, multilateralism, and the importance of alliances and partnerships provides a solid foundation for navigating the complexities of the 21st century. Section 1. The Progressive Agenda, a Nation Divided. The Biden-Harris administration entered office with a progressive agenda, promising to transform government's role. This agenda addresses climate change, income inequality, and systemic racism. Proponents see it as necessary, while critics view it as a radical departure from traditional values. Identity politics is a key aspect, focusing on racial justice, LGBTQ+ rights, and gender equality. The administration appointed a diverse cabinet, including the first female vice president and openly gay cabinet member. It reversed Trump-era policies seen as discriminatory, like the transgender military ban. Critics argue this focus is divisive and distracts from pressing issues like the economy and national security. The progressive agenda has ignited a debate about the country's direction and government's role. Climate ambitions and economic realities. The Biden-Harris administration has set ambitious goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning to a clean energy economy. Influenced by the Green New Deal, their climate agenda includes massive investments in renewable energy. However, these ambitions have collided with economic realities, contributing to higher energy prices and job losses in the fossil fuel industry. The administration argues these policies are necessary to avert climate change and lead to a sustainable economy. Section 3. Identity politics at the forefront. A nation transformed or further divided. The Biden-Harris administration has made identity politics a cornerstone of its agenda, placing issues of race, gender, and sexual orientation at the forefront of its policy decisions and rhetoric. This focus on identity has been praised by progressive activists and advocacy groups who argue that it represents a long overdue reckoning with the systemic inequalities that have long plagued American society. However, it has also drawn criticism from conservatives who argue that it is divisive, fosters resentment, and distracts from more pressing issues. The administration's emphasis on identity politics is evident in its appointments to key positions, including the first female vice president, the first black defense secretary, and the first openly gay cabinet member. It is also reflected in its policy initiatives, which have included efforts to promote racial equity in housing, healthcare, and education, to advance LGBTQ rights, and to combat violence against women. The administration has argued that these initiatives are not only morally right, but also economically necessary, as they aim to unlock the potential of all Americans and create a more just and equitable society. However, the administration's focus on identity has also been met with resistance and backlash. Critics argue that it is divisive and fosters a culture of victimhood, pitting different groups against each other. They also argue that it is based on a flawed understanding of American history and society, one that overemphasizes the role of race, gender, and sexual orientation in shaping individual outcomes. The debate over identity politics is likely to continue to rage throughout the Biden-Harris administration and beyond. Section 4, the cost of social justice, spending programs, and the national debt. The Biden-Harris administration's progressive agenda has come with a hefty price tag, as the administration has proposed trillions of dollars in new spending on social programs, infrastructure, and climate change initiatives. While proponents of these spending programs argue that they are necessary investments in the future of the country, critics warn that they will lead to unsustainable levels of debt and have a detrimental impact on the economy. The administration's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, passed in the early days of Biden's presidency, included a wide range of spending measures, including direct payments to most Americans, enhanced unemployment benefits, and funding for vaccine distribution and testing. The administration has also proposed trillions of dollars in additional spending on programs such as universal pre-K, subsidized childcare, and expanded healthcare coverage. Proponents of these spending programs argue that they are necessary to address income inequality, improve access to essential services, and stimulate economic growth. They argue that the benefits of these programs outweigh the costs, and that the government has a moral obligation to provide a safety net for its citizens. However, critics of these spending programs argue that they are fiscally irresponsible and will lead to higher taxes, inflation, and a weaker economy. They argue that the government cannot afford these programs without incurring unsustainable levels of debt, which will ultimately have to be paid for by future generations. They also argue that these programs create a culture of dependency and discourage work and self-reliance. Section 5, a cultural shift, traditional values under pressure. Beyond its economic and social policies, the Biden-Harris administration's progressive agenda has also ushered in a broader cultural shift, one that challenges traditional American values and norms. This cultural shift is evident in the administration's embrace of identity politics, its support for abortion rights and LGBTQ+ rights, and its rhetoric on issues such as race, gender, and religion. The administration's focus on identity politics has led to a greater emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of American life, from education and employment to entertainment and advertising. This emphasis on diversity has been welcomed by many who see it as a long overdue corrective to centuries of discrimination and exclusion. However, It has also been met with resistance by some who fear that it is leading to a form of reverse discrimination where qualified individuals are being passed over in favor of less qualified candidates from underrepresented groups. The administration's support for abortion rights and LGBTQ+ rights has also sparked controversy, with conservatives arguing that these positions are out of step with the values of many Americans. The administration's reversal of Trump-era policies that restricted access to abortion and transgender rights has been praised by progressives, but it has also energized the religious right, which views these issues as central to its political agenda. The Biden-Harris administration's progressive agenda has ushered in a period of significant cultural change in the United States. While proponents of this change view it as a sign of progress and a necessary step towards a more just and equitable society, critics see it as a threat to traditional values and a sign of moral decay. A surge in crime grips America. Under the Biden-Harris administration, violent crime has surged, sparking debate about its root causes. Major cities have seen spikes in homicides and violent offenses, leaving many feeling vulnerable. The statistics paint a grim picture. Homicide rates spiked in 2020 and remain elevated. Carjackings, robberies, and assaults have surged in major cities. Minority communities are disproportionately impacted. The administration focuses on addressing root causes like poverty and inequality. Critics argue this approach emboldens criminals. The administration faces mounting pressure to address the crime wave. Section 2, the defund delusion. A crisis fueled by anti-police rhetoric, the surge in crime has ignited a fierce debate about the role of law enforcement in American society. In the wake of the George Floyd murder and subsequent protests against police brutality, a movement to defund the police gained traction, particularly within progressive circles. Proponents of this movement argued that police departments are overfunded and that resources should be redirected to social programs and community-based initiatives that address the root causes of crime. While the Biden-Harris administration has distanced itself from the defund the police slogan, its rhetoric and policies have often aligned with the movement's broader goals. The administration has expressed support for police reform, including measures to increase accountability and transparency, and has called for investments in community policing and alternatives to incarceration. However, critics argue that the administration's rhetoric, coupled with its reluctance to embrace more traditional law enforcement measures, has created a climate of hostility towards police and emboldened criminals. They point to cities that have implemented significant cuts to police budgets, such as Minneapolis and Seattle, which have experienced sharp increases in crime. They argue that these cuts have led to a reduction in police presence, slower response times, and a decline in morale among officers, making it more difficult to deter crime and apprehend criminals. They also argue that the defund the police movement has demonized law enforcement, making it more difficult to recruit and retain qualified officers, particularly in minority communities that are most impacted by crime. Kamala Harris's record on crime. A prosecutor's past under scrutiny. Her past as a prosecutor has been both praised and criticized. Harris served as district attorney and attorney general, positioning herself as tough on crime. Her record is complex and nuanced. Supporters highlight her efforts to address racial disparities. Critics argue her approach impacted minority communities. Harris's record reflects the broader debate on criminal justice reform. Section 4, Restoring Order or Sowing Chaos. The search for solutions in a divided nation. The surge in crime under the Biden-Harris administration has exposed deep divisions in American society. Efforts to balance police reform with rising crime rates have left many Americans feeling frustrated and anxious. The administration has attempted to chart a middle course, acknowledging the need for both police reform and robust law enforcement. The administration has supported limited police reforms, such as banning chokeholds and requiring federal officers to wear body cameras. However, this balancing act has proven difficult to maintain, as the administration has faced criticism from both sides of the political spectrum. Building trust between law enforcement and communities, particularly communities of color, is essential to reducing crime and ensuring public safety. The search for solutions to the crime crisis will require a multifaceted approach that goes beyond traditional law enforcement strategies. Addressing the root causes of crime, such as poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity, is essential. Investing in social programs, education, and job training is crucial for long-term solutions. These efforts must be coupled with effective law enforcement strategies that hold criminals accountable and ensure community safety. The rise of social unrest. The Biden-Harris era has coincided with heightened social unrest marked by protests, riots, and division. The murder of George Floyd ignited a nationwide movement for racial justice. Protests were often met with heavy-handed police responses, leading to further tensions. The January 6th Capitol riot highlighted deep political divisions in American society. Section 2. The pandemic's psychological toll, a mental health crisis, grips America. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacted a heavy toll on the mental health of Americans, exacerbating existing mental health challenges and creating new ones. Lockdowns, school closures, job losses, and the constant fear of illness and death have created a collective trauma that has left many struggling to cope. The Biden-Harris administration, while focused on addressing the immediate health and economic impacts of the pandemic, has also acknowledged the need to address the pandemic's psychological toll. But its critics argue that its efforts have been insufficient to meet the scale of the crisis. Even before the pandemic, the United States faced a growing mental health crisis with rising rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. The pandemic has exacerbated these trends, particularly among young people who have experienced significant disruptions to their education, social lives, and mental well-being. The isolation and uncertainty of the pandemic have also taken a toll on adults, leading to increased rates of substance abuse, domestic violence, and suicide. The Biden-Harris administration has taken some steps to address the mental health crisis, including providing funding for mental health services through the American Rescue Plan and launching initiatives to raise awareness about mental health and reduce the stigma associated with seeking help. However, critics argue that these efforts have been insufficient to meet the scale of the crisis. They point to long wait times for mental health services, a shortage of mental health professionals, and inadequate insurance coverage for mental health care, as evidence that the administration is not doing enough to address this critical issue. Section 3, A Divided Nation, Polarization, Partisanship, and the Erosion of Trust. The Biden-Harris era has been marked by a deepening of political polarization and partisanship, further eroding trust in government and institutions. The two major political parties have retreated further into their respective ideological corners, with little common ground or willingness to compromise. This hyper-partisanship has made it increasingly difficult to address pressing national challenges and has created a toxic political environment that discourages civil discourse and undermines democratic norms. The rise of social media has contributed to this polarization, as algorithms often create echo chambers where individuals are only exposed to information that confirms their existing biases. This has led to a decline in shared facts and a rise in misinformation and disinformation, making it more difficult to have productive conversations about important issues. The Biden-Harris administration, despite campaigning on a promise to unite the country, has often struggled to bridge this divide. Its critics argue that its policies have often favored one side of the political spectrum over the other, further alienating those who already feel unheard and unrepresented. The administration's handling of issues such as immigration, climate change, and gun control has been particularly divisive, with both sides accusing the other of extremism and bad faith. Section 4, The Search for Healing, Addressing the Underlying Causes of Unrest. The social unrest and mental health challenges that have characterized the Biden-Harris era are symptoms of deeper societal issues that cannot be ignored. Addressing these issues will require a long-term, multifaceted approach that goes beyond partisan politics and addresses the root causes of division, inequality, and despair. One of the most pressing challenges facing the United States is the persistence of systemic racism and discrimination. Despite decades of progress, racial disparities persist in areas such as education, healthcare, housing, and criminal justice. Addressing these disparities is essential to creating a more just and equitable society where all Americans have the opportunity to succeed. Economic inequality is another major challenge as the gap between the wealthy and everyone else continues to widen. This inequality has eroded the middle class, fueled resentment, and created a sense of hopelessness among many Americans. Addressing economic inequality will require policies that promote economic opportunity, such as investing in education, job training, and affordable housing. The erosion of trust in institutions is another serious problem that must be addressed. This lack of trust extends to government, media, corporations, and even religious institutions. Restoring trust will require greater transparency, accountability, and a commitment to ethical behavior from those in positions of power. The challenges facing the United States are complex and daunting, but they are not insurmountable. Section 1. A legacy marred by crisis. The Biden-Harris administration entered office with lofty promises to heal divisions, restore America's standing in the world, and build a more just and equitable society. However, their tenure has been dominated by a relentless series of crises, both domestic and foreign, that have tested their leadership and left the nation grappling with a profound sense of uncertainty about the future. From the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan to the surge in violent crime and the economic anxieties fueled by soaring inflation, the Biden-Harris years have been a tumultuous period marked by a sense of drift and a perceived lack of competence. The administration's supporters argue that they have faced an unprecedented set of challenges, inheriting a nation reeling from a global pandemic, a divided political landscape, and a world increasingly characterized by instability and uncertainty. They point to the administration's efforts to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, pass a historic infrastructure bill, and provide economic relief to struggling Americans as evidence of their commitment to governing effectively. They also highlight the administration's efforts to restore America's global leadership, strengthen alliances, and stand up to authoritarian regimes. However, for many Americans, these accomplishments have been overshadowed by a series of unforced errors, miscalculations, and a perceived lack of urgency in addressing the most pressing challenges facing the nation. Section 2. The Verdict of History. The ultimate verdict on the Biden-Harris administration will be left to historians. It is not too early to assess their impact on the nation. Have they destroyed America, as critics claim, or laid the groundwork for a more just, equitable future? The answer is likely nuanced and multifaceted. They made strides in combating COVID-19 and addressing climate change. Efforts to promote racial justice and LGBTQ+ rights have been praised, but setbacks like inflation and economic anxieties remain. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the surge in violent crime have taken a toll on the administration's standing. Their handling of culture wars has been divisive. Progressive policies have alienated some. Efforts to promote diversity have met resistance. The Biden-Harris legacy will be debated for years. Their presidency has been a time of both progress and setbacks. Section 3. A Call to Action. Reclaiming the American Dream. The challenges facing the United States are significant, but they are not insurmountable. It is a collective responsibility, one that requires the active engagement of all citizens. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen. Restoring faith in the American dream will require a renewed commitment to principles of fairness, opportunity, and social mobility. The challenges facing the United States are not insurmountable, but they will require a renewed sense of national purpose. And it is up to all Americans to reclaim the promise of the American